This is SG2 Perspectives, a conversation with SG2 experts and industry thought leaders about the biggest trends in healthcare and what we expect that's going to mean for the future of healthcare delivery.
We're going to continue to see a shift towards focusing on wellness. We hear sometimes people say they're looking for well care and not sick care, and that maybe a mindset shift from consumers, even putting more pressure on primary care and what you get from a primary care offering and what is being offered from a system as it relates to primary care and that day-to-day care before you're a high acuity patient.
Welcome to SG2 Perspectives. I'm your host, Trevor DaRin. I have my colleague and partner in crime on all things primary care, Hailey Mulliner, with me today. Not only did Hailey just write a briefing about some of the things we're seeing and hearing from leading health systems across the country, but it's forecast season, so we've had to do a lot of thinking about what we think is going to happen in the future of primary care and what we've seen in the recent past in our data. And so it's a great time to put our heads together and talk about a nonstop strategic priority for health systems, and that's thinking about what they want their primary care strategy, network, approach, return on investment, et cetera, to be. So Hailey, thank you so much for joining. What's changing in primary care? Why was it important to write about this now?
I don't know if I would even use the word changing or the word accelerating. As we wrote in the briefing, it seems like it's not new strategies that systems are focusing on. It's accelerating existing strategies. It's just a pivotal point for primary care. Disruptors are gaining more traction from consumers, so broader population is getting smarter on their alternative options for primary care, which puts a little bit more pressure on health systems in terms of what they're offering as it relates to primary care. It's a time when a lot of primary care physicians are about to be at that retirement age, so we're feeling like those workforce constraints even more so now. How do we do less with more is what we heard from a lot of the health systems that we interviewed during this primary care briefing. And how do you pivot your current primary care strategy to be one that does work for everyone in terms of your docs, your providers in general, and then your patients? We've heard a variety of different ways to approach that, which might not be anything particularly new, but maybe a revamp or an acceleration of strategies we've seen in the past, like how to leverage those APPs and building out offerings like concierge medicine.
Yeah, what's changing for me, it's like a lot of the environment around primary care seems to be shifting, but most systems are still thinking about planning, adjusting how their primary care is going to change to keep up. And the most common question I've heard from systems is, how's panel size expectations changing? Which usually has all these layers to unpack underneath it around, okay, well, that's probably because you're still on work RVUs. And how does that connect to panel size? And do you have the same panel size expectations for different practice models and different locations and age and mix of how much providers want to be a full-time FTE? And there's all these layers underneath where some of the traditional expectations around panel size have stuck around because they're codified in incentives and comp structures, but all the pieces around it have moved and evolved so much.
I totally agree with that, Trevor.
That's not quite a strategic question. We get that question a lot more than we get the broad, what should we be doing in primary care, or how should our primary care strategy change? But what strategic questions are health systems asking themselves, or do you think they should be asking themselves around primary care right now?
One of the other main questions that we get asked, panel size isn't necessarily a strategic question, but it seems like there's always a lot of strategic questions hidden underneath that broader question of panel size. It's, what does our workforce look like? What should it look like for our patients? How do we build out the right workforce in these different clinic offerings for primary care? Thinking more strategically how to leverage the workforce you currently have, and then how to attract and retain that workforce is a main focus. Also, what is our concierge medicine strategy? Should we have one? Is it something we want to dive into? Is it something that we should think about for partnerships? What does it look like for different systems? Concierge medicine is a popular question that's coming up, and it relates directly to their primary care strategy and how it fits into that. Also, what does it look like to build out the different clinics and care models for primary care? Should we have one overarching primary care strategy, or is it one overarching system strategy and then primary care fits in a bunch of different holes for that strategy?
Building off that, we're also hearing high-level questions around most systems can measure leakage, and they think about leakage in pretty traditional primary care to specialty. What should we be shooting at? Most will refine their geographic boundaries and stuff like that to make leakage seem like it's doing okay. Some of our national looks show that it's only about a third of the handoff between primary care and specialty that's staying within the health system. Systems are thinking more about how to measure leakage, and that goes to the second thing they're trying to unpack, which is around return on investment, because it's easy math to say the subsidy doesn't add up to the revenue in the clinic, especially when we're attributing health system overhead to it. But there's a bunch of other ways we could track the ROI from primary care in terms of relationship building, which I know that's work our team's done, but also all the ancillaries, diagnostics, et cetera, that stem from primary care as part of that downstream funnel. Systems want to, increasingly can track it, but they can run into the legacy and internal machinery of keeping primary care on a standalone island is better, because then everyone else attributes the ancillaries and imaging and diagnostics, et cetera, to other buckets. Primary care leadership is pushing on the way traditional ROI has been looked at to try and include more of the direct connection that may not happen in the primary care office, but is very clearly connected and one step away from that primary care visit. What practice models, team-based care models are you seeing emerge from leading health systems that have more progressive approaches to primary care, that are segmenting patient populations, that are building different practice models, largely as a physician satisfier? If that's not the primary reason, that's at least a secondary reason. What different models are you seeing, Hailey?
You hit it on the head with that being, if not a primary reason, a secondary reason to have these different clinic models is that physician satisfaction. There's patients as a consumer segmentation aspect to it, rather than segmenting patients clinically. That didn't come up too much in those interviews for that briefing, but really thinking about patients from a consumer standpoint and building out clinics like that concierge offering, a virtual only offering. A lot of systems have that 65 plus. I think that's where a lot of systems start, with building out different clinic types for primary care, focusing on that 65 plus. Then maybe they have a value-based care clinic, adding in something like that concierge, that virtual only, maybe a more community focused clinic is what we heard a lot of. It is just interesting to mention that it's more of a consumer focused segmentation in my mind than a clinical focused segmentation, which was that hypothesis going into that briefing. But this seems to satisfy the patients and also satisfy the physicians when we look at systems that have different clinic offerings. And within those clinic offerings, they might have different comp models, just different working structures, different panel sizes across those clinics. So it gives the physician some flexibility in how they want to work, and gives an opportunity to retain some of that workforce that's retiring. But then it also offers a variety of options for your patients and what kind of ways they want to receive their primary care.
Yeah, the two new things we heard that stood out to me in this research was, first, we heard a big academic with a provider-sponsored health plan talk about, in the secondary part of their market, that they had moved new patient visits, all new patient primary care visits, to virtual first, because they had high no-show rates, and at least doing a short, instead of a 45-minute in-person, doing a 15-minute virtual increased the rate at which those patients showed up for the follow-up in-person visit. Obviously, less disruptive for someone to miss a virtual visit than to miss something in person. Everyone I've shared that with really liked it. That's going to grow pretty quickly and move from a one-off to something others try as well. A great way to use the virtual access that many have.
Every time I share that story, people's eyes light up. They're like, oh, that's different. I haven't heard that before. The other thing I thought was interesting is when we were talking to the system that mentioned they had seen their concierge clinic used often by the elderly parents, and then their children's are the one enrolling them in the concierge clinic to have more control over their parents' care and making sure that they have more on-demand access through that concierge model. That was interesting because that 65 plus is often a clinic you hear built out in these health systems, but then leveraging concierge in that way, I just hadn't heard it before.
I've been in that boat, and there's a huge opportunity for a system to prioritize. And there's a tough balance here between privacy and appropriate communication. But having been in that situation with a patient who was elderly and deteriorating quickly and multiple problems going on, being able to feel like we could get access to more information that was simply in the medical record for the multiple health systems they were visiting, there's a huge opportunity in concierge to be a better conduit and a better in-between in that connector, of information. So I can totally see caregivers for patients trying to go around and use concierges that in between. The other piece, when systems have segmented by consumer preference or need, it also inevitably creates a different practice model. And that's been a huge benefit for the health system because then they just have an alternative to offer providers. Rather than one way of practicing for primary care providers, at least there's alternatives. Even if the providers don't necessarily take it, feeling like there's a few different flavors and models for them to think about and think about what's important to them, work-life balance, work-day balance, etc., has been a good thing. I make sure I include that when we talk about the benefits of senior-focused clinics, but I'm sure that's the case in others as well.
Yeah, even just mentioning the virtual only, allowing some systems to retain providers that have moved out of state because they're staying licensed in that state they moved from, and it gives them that added layer of retention. It's really interesting.
Inboxologists. I love that term. Someone who's focused on helping manage the flow of asynchronous communications from patients. And great, you're the inboxologist. You're focused on helping providers who are in clinic that day manage that flow of information. I love it. Hailey, what do you think the next set of questions systems are going to ask us will be around primary care? Like, what do you think the next wave of new ideas, new questions, things they're going to try to tackle will be?
It's come up quite a bit recently and it ties pretty closely to primary care, but keep getting a lot of questions around integrative medicine and wellness and how they either tack that on to a primary care offering or how do they dive into that world of wellness, knowing that it's an ever-growing market and an opportunity to get some extra revenue from a different area of the health system. We're going to continue to see a shift towards focusing on wellness. We hear sometimes people say they're looking for well care and not sick care, and that maybe a mindset shift from consumers, even putting more pressure on primary care and what you get from a primary care offering and what is being offered from a system as it relates to primary care. That day-to-day care before you're a high acuity patient.
So you think systems will be wondering if they can, should, or how to integrate that in a traditional primary care offering? We certainly haven't heard of many making big moves in that direction yet.
Not something I've heard from systems yet. As of end of last year, start of this year, we've gotten a handful of questions on how to approach something like this or what is an example of this. And we don't really have them yet. But if those questions are coming up, it's definitely going to be something that continues to be talked about.
Yeah, it's going to be a consideration. I think it ties to a lot of the other pieces thinking about ROI and who's going to provide the work and what they want the clinic practice team environment, what the workday looks like for the provider to feel like. But I think all of a sudden it's going to seem like traditional primary care offerings are trying to mirror what's largely their new competition, which is the wellness and integrated care space. How do you think leading health systems are going to rethink primary care in the next few years? Similar to the last question, but not exactly the same.
Continuing to lean on AI and seeing how AI is going to evolve is going to change how primary care is delivered. Leading systems, you need that ambient listening tool for your providers in order to be a leading system in the primary care space, just in terms of being able to open up extra access. We had a quote of someone mentioning that their physician said they could see 5 more patients a day, given the time they got freed up from their ambient listening tools.
I bet they don't. Unfortunately, that's what all our data has shown. It's a huge win on the provider satisfaction side. It hasn't totally meant more productivity yet.
Has it paid off? We're early still in the buy-in of AI in systems, and this seems like the first big buy-in is that ambient listening. How will AI evolve to support some of this other stuff? That's to be seen. Doubling down on having multiple different segmentation strategies, not only for your patients, but also for your providers. That's going to keep you as a leading system. If you don't give your physicians those different options and what type of primary care clinic they can practice in, another system is going to do that. Workforce, it's hard to retain right now and it's hard to recruit. So how do you make your primary care offering the most attractive to your patients, but also to those physicians that you're trying to keep? That segmentation and different clinic types is going to be really helpful to do that.
I'm with you. AI is going to be table stakes, and there's going to be systems that push it to be a productivity tool and others that it's just an expectation and it makes documentation a little easier. The other thing that we're going to see in the next few years is the pendulum's going to swing back on employment, where local providers were experimenting with being concierge only or joining a disruptor, particularly Optum. We've started to see in some of the earliest Optum markets, there's already rumblings of providers getting out of those contracts and going back to being independent, or in many cases, going back to at least discussions with health systems about employment. That's absolutely going to continue. That's true across specialties. In primary care in particular, there was probably a fair amount of experimentation in the last couple of years by providers. Not a lot of younger providers, but there may be a swing back of providers saying it's better to just be employed, and health systems will welcome them back and welcome doubling down on employment as probably their most reliable alignment mechanism. There'll still be work on CINs and other strategies, but largely what we've seen and heard recently is systems investing more in employment. There's just more providers available. They'll probably continue that.
I was having a conversation with Emily, lead of our medicine service line, and she asked me if we're hearing about primary care physicians that are having a focus or a specialization within primary care, and if we think that's something that we'll see an uptick. She was bringing it up in regards to obesity and everyone's favorite topic, those GLP-1s. But I thought it was an interesting question, and it would fit right in with that employment stuff if they do have an option at different systems to have a more focused area within primary care. Just another option to keep physicians happy, keep providers happy with some flexibility and diversity in what they're practicing.
Good thought. You're right on. Hailey, thanks for sharing so much today of both what we heard in our research and your opinion and what you think is going to happen next. So thanks as always for sharing your perspective with our listeners.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us, and or follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn at Sg2 Healthcare. And if you want to talk more about innovative healthcare strategies, you can always email me at sg2perspectives@sg2.com. Finally, SG2 is a Vizient company, and there are a bunch of Vizient podcasts that you might like. You can find them at Vizient /podcasts. Have a great day.